Welcome back to Henry Felix Discourses. Today's going to be fun because we're going to talk about English, and I think you'll like it. I'd like to talk about how to get to that PDF for Winsor School, in case you want to read it on your own or follow along, because I do have to downgrade the upload a little bit, and it's hard to read on the screen, I think. But I'll be reading it aloud anyway, so you don't have to worry about that. Anyway, go to Winsor School. You click on that. You come to their homepage, go up here to the upper right, which I'm moving around here right now, and then you click that. Then you go to About, and you go down to Equity and Inclusion right here. And then you click on that, and you get to this page. You scroll down, and you get to DEI Report. Click on that. It takes you to this page. It says Lift Every Voice right there. And to get the PDF, you have to click on this. Read the report. That will cause a PDF to download. And I just want to warn you, it downloads fine. If you try to save it and you don't have the paid version of Adobe, it may not save very well. But you can definitely read it online. And that's what I did. That's what I'm working with right now. So when I'm showing you DEI, it's just what I got. When I clicked on that, it automatically came up, and then it opened my Adobe DC, and then there it was. So let's go to what they have for English, and it's right here. It's the first one. They did them all in alphabetical order. So English. The English department uses literature to support Windsor's principles of global responsibility. We'll go to that in a second. It's the first most important thing. So we'll go and look that up. It's in the same PDF. By helping students develop an empathetic understanding of others and by encouraging them to illuminate core assumptions and values that define their own identity and cultural perspective while recognizing that their own worldview may not be universally shared. Okay, so that's a big quote from what we're going to see right now. This is Principles of Global Responsibility. Let's read what they have to say, because this is what the English curriculum is supposed to support. The Winsor School believes that a critical dimension of academic excellence in the 21st century is the preparation for responsible participation in the global community. The forces of globalization now ensure that individuals and communities, separated by vast geographic distances and cultural differences, are increasingly interconnected and interdependent. I'd like to pause on the idea of forces of globalization. I'm not sure exactly what they mean, but they are probably talking about everything from economic forces to political forces. And I think we know that there are some political forces that would like to see a globalist government. Whether you believe that it's that serious or not, or whether it's that powerful or not, there are people who would want that. But the forces of globalization, and they talk about interconnectedness, I think a little historical perspective on this will help. I cannot find it, but I read years ago this New York Times editorial before World War II talking about how it would be impossible to have another world war. It could never happen because the world is too interconnected. There's too much trade. There's too much communication between the continents. It could never happen again. And of course it did. So anytime people are making these big predictions about the future and that we have to act a certain way or plan on the future never comes out the way we think. So I just wanted to point that out with this. They're taking a gamble here inherently by saying it'll be a global world. And if that's what they're supporting with the English curriculum, that's what their goal is. Distant peoples and events shape local worlds, while at the same time individual and community decisions made at Windsor, in Boston, or in New England often have an impact on wider social and ecological environments. So they might be punching above their weight to be saying that you're going to have an effect on the world. I've heard it said that CRT and DEI there's a certain narcissism involved where they think that they're that important, that what you do in that classroom will affect the entire world. It has a tiny effect, sure. Whether that's proportional to centering your school's curriculum around that is another question. But it's a fair point to say that there's a communication between what happens in the world and what happens locally, and what happens with an individual and what happens with a group. Continuing on, in preparing its students to act responsibly in this interconnected and interdependent world, the Winsor School is committed to ensuring that its students not only understand the nature of globalization, but also appreciate the personal stakes and responsibilities they have as global citizens. So let's stop on global citizens. That's a new concept. I don't think that's been around for very long. In a way, it has, but the idea that we're supposed to be raising our children to be global citizens is a new idea. And so that's what they're backing up here. And this is mostly an expose, so I just wanted to point that out and dwell on that just for a moment. It's not talking about being an American. That's apparently passé. It's about being a global citizen. There are a lot of ways you can define a global citizen. But anyway, that's what the idea is. The principles set forth below make explicit what we, as a diverse community of teachers and learners, believe global citizenship entails. So, here's what it is to be a global citizen. There are 6 major points here. We believe global citizens. Now, I'd actually like to pause here for a moment and go to one of the specifics that they're talking about. I've mentioned it before, but one of the specifics about being a member of the global world, or I guess for lack of a better term, is the 2030 agenda. That's happening in the colleges and the high schools and everywhere, really. There's this idea that the 2030 agenda is something they need to be aiming for and in tune with. Comes from the United Nations. Let's look at the preamble and find out what their most important thing is. So Windsor's most important things is support the Winsor Project, and then this is in reference to this, among other things, but largely this, the 2030 agenda. So the preamble says, this agenda, capital A agenda, is a plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity. It also seeks to strengthen universal peace in larger freedom. Not sure what larger freedom means exactly. I really don't. I think that's open to many interpretations, including having just one big government. I have a feeling they're not talking about a libertarian world. Let's put it that way. We recognize that eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including extreme poverty, is the greatest global challenge and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. Now, sustainable development is, I'll talk about this more another time, and it's a lot to take in all at once because it sounds like there's too much going on here. This is overwhelming. But sustainable development to them really is Marxism because they're talking about a world that doesn't need any inputs, where we have carbon neutral. And their view is that the only way to get there is through a very conformist, collectivist world, and that will be accomplished through Marxism. But getting back to the point that I really wanted to talk about here is that in order for that to happen, they have to address extreme poverty. That has to be an issue. This is one of these things where that needs to be something that is an important thing. And I would say it's a red herring. And I think the numbers support that. Because here we have data on world poverty. It's going down. These 3 lines mean something. I'll try to put all these links in below so that you can come back to them at your leisure. But we see this goes from 1820 to 2017, and poverty is going down, and it's going down faster and faster. Here's another one. This is from 2000 to 2019. Here we've got 29% extreme poverty, or 29 So in 2019, it's 29%, okay, is in extreme poverty, which is defined here as $2.15 a day or less, I suppose. 29%, and that's going down, okay? Basically, we're almost there. I mean, it's 8.4% now in 2019. And it's not going back up. This keeps going down. So another great visualization is this one. Here we've got the people not in extreme poverty in green and the people living in extreme poverty in red. So basically the same graph, 1820 to 2017. So you can see here it's almost everybody's almost everybody's in extreme poverty. That stays around the same. And then when we get the Industrial Revolution, things start to change. For a while, you still have the sheer numbers of people in poverty still going up, although the number of people not in poverty going up much faster. And then here we reach the breaking point where the people living in extreme poverty actually starts going down and then goes down really fast. I mean, that's really on its way down. So things are actually looking good. And I'm going to hit play here because it's kind of a neat little thing that they show how that works. I think that's kind of neat. It starts in 1820, but if you extend this back thousands and thousands of years, that wouldn't change much. This has been extremely recent that this has happened. And it's happened with industrialization and capitalism. That's what's brought us so much less poverty. Now, most of this decrease in extreme poverty comes from India and China. India was a socialist country for a long time, and they've made reforms, not as much as they could have, and they've had a moderate decrease. Well, it's a big decrease, but they've gone down not quite as fast as China, and they haven't grown as fast as China. China being very much of a communist country and with unbelievably destructive policies from Mao Zedong and leaders like that, who really just ruined the country. Once they brought in just a little bit of capitalism in the 80s, then all of a sudden it starts going down. So those two countries are the lion's share of this. But we can see that we're making progress. We're making a lot of progress. I don't know if we can really argue that as much as the 2030 agenda wants to, that's like the number one thing. I mean, I suppose in a way it is morally, but look at it. It's changing now. I don't know if we need a giant initiative, and certainly not one that's more or less based on Marxism. But anyway, there's another great visualization of this coming. Oh, no. There it is. It's a little bit below here. Here it is. We've got the world population living in extreme poverty. Here we can see that almost all the world is living in extreme poverty except a little bit, and it starts going down and it goes faster and faster. So this is an exponential curve going the way we want it in terms of poverty. It's going down really fast. We're practically there. It's almost over. I mean, we're almost done with this, and there's a reason for it. Now, we contrast that with how people feel about it, though. This is the share of population who think the world is getting better. Look at the USA, 6%. 6%. So that's where the Agenda 2030, they propagate this, and that's where they can get away with saying that, excluding extreme poverty is the greatest global challenge. It was the greatest global challenge, and we're winning. I mean, we're winning now. So that comes from this particular website. This is a good one to look at because sometimes if you're just searching the web, you'll find, well, here we have the absolute rate of poverty going up. Not the rate, but the numbers going up still. But we have to remember that this is from 2001, okay? And if we look at where this is coming from, and then we go back to this, we can see that there's a little uptick around there. And it's kind of, if we sliver out just that little bit, sure, it doesn't really look like we're making the same progress, but then it goes shooting down after that. So there's 20 years of data missing from that. It comes from this website, okay, which is here, the ability to eliminate extreme poverty, compassion blog, okay, and that's where that is. But here, right here in their own blog, they talk about how here we've got China, we've got the blue line showing growth going up, poverty going down fast. India, a little bit more muted, like I was saying, but growth going way up, poverty going down. It's working. Yeah, it's working now. And we should be really happy about that and proud of it. Now, back to Winsor. So we will keep reading this. So that was their first paragraph. And if you're wondering, if you kind of forgot that we were talking about English, I don't blame you, because I sort of did too, because we've gone so far afield. But this is what Winsor says is the most important thing. The English department uses literature to support principles of global responsibility, which is what they have in their pamphlet, and that refers to things like the 2030 agenda. There's a lot more to be said about poverty, obviously, but there it is. It's an activist agenda. They're making bets on what's going to happen. I don't think they're all accurate bets. I don't think there's always an accurate interpretation. Okay, that's what they want in their curriculum. So continuing on, they say, to that end, we strive to develop a curriculum that serves as a mirror of students' own experiences and a window into the lives and feelings of others. At each grade level, English courses include texts that represent diverse voices, points of view, experiences, genres, and styles, and also emphasize self-exploration through personal writing assignments and projects. That all sounds pretty standard. I can tell you that my personal observation from being a tutor for 7 years, and I'm fully aware that that does not mean that I am the be-all and end-all of everything, and that does not mean I know everything that's going on in all the schools. Far from it. We've got 132,000 schools in the area of K to 12, and my having done a number of schools as students from a number of schools, pretty good number, but just that does not mean I know everything, and anecdotes do not add up to data. However, I think it's valid. What I'm trying to add with this blog in general, with this channel, is to just point out some things that I've observed, and one of them is that when they are doing this and talking about experiences and genres, they probably could do that with all the regular works of literature that we're used to hearing about. But they bring in new ones that are specifically designed for diverse voices, meaning in the world of DEI, ethnically diverse. That's fine, because they're actually, what I saw for what kids were reading, they're good books and they're enjoyable. There's nothing really wrong with them, and you do learn something about another point of view. However, I found that they generally were beach reading. Beach, B-E-A-C-H, reading. Easy books. They were not a challenge. And there's something missing there, because if you don't study Shakespeare when you're in college, and often these books move in and take the place of books like the plays of Shakespeare, or just one of the plays, or Charles Dickens, or whoever else, Herman Melville, Nathaniel Hawthorne, you only have time for so much. And if you don't read a Shakespeare play at some time in college or high school, sometimes even grade school, you're never going to read it again. You're probably never going to go back and read a Shakespeare play. You don't have time, you don't have energy in later life to do that, unless you're an English teacher. So it's a missed opportunity if you don't do it then. And you're not losing anything by reading those dusty old dead white male books. Like, take a play like Macbeth. That is about someone with ambition, and it's about life and how people deal with ambition and wanting things and how they interrelate with other people. It's not a book about the English aristocracy or the Scottish one. And it's not a comment on whether aristocracy is the right government. And it's not a comment on white people in England. It's on none of that. It's about value. It's about the human condition that really can apply to anyone. And anyone in the world can read those plays and get a tremendous amount out of it. And you also see truly stellar examples of writing itself that you don't really find in the books that they're giving out often right now. They're easy books. They're written the way you would talk. There's nothing particularly special about them or challenging. So that's a sacrifice that's being made. Continuing on, English courses provide one forum for engaging in important discussions about identity, power, equity, and inclusion. So here we are. These courses are not just for principles of global responsibility, but therefore DEI. DEI is designed to be part of every facet of school life, and by extension, CRT. It is not supposed to be something that you think about once in a while. It's supposed to get into every part of school life. And here it is. It's an English class. And it's really just a vehicle for talking about DEI. They have included power in that. That is something that de-emphasizes the individual, if crushing isn't the right word, because that is about how identity groups, different groups, get what they want through power. And the reason that their ideas are prevalent is because they have more power than other groups, not because they have good reasons for having their ideas. It's a completely different idea than what we learned from the Enlightenment, which is that reasons and evidence are why you have ideas, and that your ethnicity and your group doesn't matter. If you've got an argument that makes sense, it should not matter at all what your name is, what your race is, what your creed is, what your religion is, what any other identity marker is. It's about the ideas. Here, it's not. It's about the group. And ideas are there because the group has power. Totally different. And the fact that the English curriculum is really for this, to be talking about DEI, is the definition of indoctrination. Continuing on, and we embrace the responsibility of facilitating these discussions with care, sensitivity, and courage. We are committed to ongoing development of our curriculum and pedagogy. It's always so nice when people are sticking that knife in with a smile. Last paragraph. Our English teachers bring an understanding that there are many ways to speak and write the English language, and know the importance of respecting the discourse that students bring with them from home. Now, this is an idea that should be in every English curriculum and has been for thousands of years, because this very concept started with Aristotle when he wrote the Poetics. And I think I found a picture of the Poetics for you to look at. There it is. That's Aristotle's Poetics. And he talked about how, among many other things, that there are different ways of speaking. And his general ones were that you've got a normal version of speaking that you use with people that are your equals, and then you've got formal speaking where you use them with other people in informal settings, and you've got sacred speech that you use with rituals or things like speaking the epics. So he recognized all the way back then, you have different ways of speaking. That's something that I was certainly right up front with all my students always, and I'm so glad that I was forced to read Aristotle's Poetics, although I probably would not have chosen that for myself. It was part of a course that we had to take. Because I could tell them that, when they complained, why do we have to learn the grammar and why do we have to speak like this? Because nobody talks like that in real life. And I'd say, well, you have a way of talking to your peers and you have a way of talking to your teachers and your parents. And there are different ways of speaking, and those are legitimate, and we need those. That's part of being a human being. So that is a great thing to have in there. And, discourse that students bring with them from home. This is where you get a little idea that where it's coming from, that all forms of discourse are acceptable. And they can't really mean that, because not everything that is said at home is going to be appropriate in the classroom, no matter what kind of school you are. There are always going to be things that you can't say in front of the group that you may well have heard from home, or that really should only be confided in private. That is not something that you can really have as a general rule. Just bring anything and everything. Maybe they would claim that they're not quite saying that, but on paper, that's pretty much what it is, respecting the discourse that students bring with them from home. Sometimes you have to say no, and that's going to be true no matter what culture you're in, no matter what time period you're in, no matter what your religion is. There's always going to be a little bit of that. That's just life. The study of English includes this, but there's a reason that they want to establish that, and I'll get to that in a second. The study of English includes discussion of the evolution of the language and the historical reasons behind the preference for certain forms of English in different settings. Okay, so there are different forms, and then what are the reasons behind those, the preference for certain forms? That's going to come back to power, where, You have a preference for it because certain people have power. And since they have power, their speech is the dominant form of speech. And that's true sometimes, but it's not the rule that stands for everything. Power is not the one and only thing that rules our lives. I mean, it has an effect, but they way overemphasize this. It's way out of proportion. And even if it's true, because in a way it is, if we were just animals and like dogs running around, everything would be about power, I suppose. But the whole human experience of becoming civilized people and becoming above the level of the ape, why don't we say, when we evolved beyond being savages, one of the things that we overcame was that things are just about power, because they're not. Things are not just about power. If we have a developed society, things are about reason, so that the powerful cannot lord it over the weak. And that's why we have democracy. Democracy and individuality used to be considered extreme and horrible and things that would destroy society. And that is because that would destroy a power structure. I mean, that was part of it, for sure. And the idea of the Enlightenment was saying, well, no, just because you have a power structure does not mean you're right, and does not mean that's the way society should be organized. That goes back to many things in religion and politics. So this is a step back here. They are not progressing by saying it's all about power. It's a step back to saying, okay, we'll go back to the days where really just the most powerful people are in charge. So let's just read that again. Includes discussions of the evolution of the language and the historical reasons behind the preference for certain forms of English in different settings. Now, this is where they've made the argument in such a way that it's hard to say that they're explicitly right now saying, well, it's just about power. But they have established that that's the currency of the realm when they're talking about something like this. Why certain forms of English would be preferred in certain settings. And I don't think it's true when you look at something like Aristotle's Poetics, because no matter how much you want to, a teacher might want to have everybody speak perfect English. When kids are talking to each other, they're going to speak normally the way they talk with kids. That's just the way it is. Moving on. It is our hope that students will see language as flexible, dynamic, and powerful in many forms. True. Our collective goal is to help students value their own linguistic heritage and that of others, to develop their own voice in writing and speech, and have the linguistic flexibility to match their language and tone to their audience and purpose. Great. I mean, that's right in line. I think that's good. Now, stepping back from this, though, a little bit more, I want to say one more thing about the idea of all forms of language being completely equal to others. And why don't we try to put it in terms of equity? All forms of language get the same, let's say. The same power, the same respect. That means really you should be able to speak any way you want. So those students who raise their hand and say, why should we learn proper English because nobody talks like that? Well, then the answer would be, okay, well, yes, talk however you want. They're all valid forms of speech. And that includes really every dialect. They're all valid. And I'm fascinated by dialects. I spent more time learning a German dialect at one point than everybody was laughing at me because they were saying you could be learning Italian, But I was really interested in that. And it's absolutely valid and you learn a lot from it. But to say that you could just use whatever kind of language you want means that you'll have a lot of miscommunication. So if you don't have words that are known to be defined amongst everyone and reference that are common and forms of grammar that are common, you can have misunderstandings. In other words, you need a lingua franca where everybody can speak to everyone else, regardless of what their particular dialect might be or how they may talk 99% of the time with normal people that they spend their time with. They still need to be able to speak the language, the lingua franca. There is a purpose to it. And like many other things, we've got that parable of the Tower of Babel, where the common language that they had was destroyed specifically so that people could not join together and build something great. And if you take that away, you have destroyed, you've worked against progress. So I hesitate to keep going because, again, it gets a little overwhelming. But the general goal of CRT is really just itself a vehicle for critical theory, which is a Marxist theory. And the idea for that is to bring down all pillars of society, completely destroy them. They're so fouled up, there's nothing you can do with them except destroy them and bring them down to nothing. And then from that will spring up the perfect society. It's very vague. I'll say vaguely defined a lot, because when I say that, I mean that they don't really have a description of how that's going to happen. And they never have. Marx had much the same idea. You need to take down the forms of society, and he had this whole process for how that was going to happen, but everything was going to just wither away. Power structures would just wither away, kind of by magic. That's what he said, wither away. They'll just wither away. And then we'll have this perfect world. And he didn't have a plan for that. You have about 2 pages in the back of Das Kapital where he talks about fishing in the morning and I can't remember, being a professor at night or something. And that's it, just a very general description, but nothing compared to the many hundreds and hundreds of pages he wrote about what was wrong with capital and capitalism. So he did not have a plan. And when he was pressed on it, said, how's communism actually going to work? He said, I'm not in the business of writing cookbooks. That's for other people to figure out. So they tried. They said, all right, who cares? You just break it down, start moving, and things will just work out. Stumble forward. And DEI is much like the same thing. We'll just put CRT into practice, and we'll tear down all the societal norms and everything, and then things will just somehow be all right, and we're not really sure how, but the main thing is to just move forward. Just shove it along, and things will be okay. So that's ultimately what we're looking at. And I understand why people get a little overwhelmed with something like that, because you say, well, can we really draw all that out of 2 paragraphs of a description of the English department of a small private school in Massachusetts? And unfortunately, yes, that's the surprising thing. Yes, they do mean all of these things. And, they've got it in black and white. What have they left out? They've left out of the English curriculum, which I'd probably like to see, is that you read books in order to appreciate art. You learn books to learn about yourself. You read books to learn about life. Those are the reasons. That's the value of English. And not to mention enjoying yourself. So I hope that provides food for thought. And we don't have to accept the idea of teaching children that the world is about power. We don't have to accept teaching them that reason doesn't matter and that identity and group only matters. We don't have to accept the idea that learning is about activism. We don't have to accept that easy books are what you get at school. We can have them challenged. We can prepare them better than this. We can do better than this. We don't have to forget everything, all 3,500 years of philosophy and progress that the Western world has made. And we don't have to forget about all the things that they need to understand why we have the society and government that we have right now. So anyway, I really enjoyed this one myself. I hope you did too, and I hope to see you again.